4:30 in the morning, a nightingale starts singing over a patch of Bedfordshire. It's singing over land nobody's farmed since 1988. That's when one farmer walked away from it in the middle of an argument with the government about corn. 37 years later, that argument would end up mattering to thousands of strangers, people who had nothing to do with him or with farming. 9 out of 10 nightingales are gone from Britain since the 1960s. This is one of the last places they've got left, thick enough with hawthorn and blackthorn to hide in. If you look up the official record for this spot, it still says farm, Strawberry Hill Farm, same name it's carried since the farmhouse was built in 1868. Cultivated fields, a farmhouse. That's what's on paper. What's actually here is 377 acres of the densest scrub in the middle of England, nearly half the size of New York's Central Park. And none of it has ever had legal protection, not once since 1988. No reserve status, no SSSI, nothing stopping a bulldozer on a Tuesday morning if the right offer ever came in. A nightingale is a small, plain, brown bird, built more for hiding in the dense, tangled scrub it lives in than for being seen. It's also a relentless insect eater, feeding almost constantly through the breeding season, which helps keep that same scrub's insect population in check. That's exactly the kind of habitat Britain has been losing fastest. Farmland got tidier, more heavily sprayed, and the scrubby, messy edges birds like this need simply stopped existing. Turtle doves needed those same edges, and they're down 97% across Britain since the 1960s. Nowhere did those edges disappear faster than Bedfordshire. Drive through Bedfordshire Today, and it barely announces itself. Flat, arable fields stretch out with hedgerows cut low enough to see straight over, and mature trees spaced so far apart they look like they were told to keep their distance. Strawberry Hill itself sits hidden between the A1, A6, and a 14, in gently rolling countryside, easy enough to drive past without ever noticing. It's one of the most intensively farmed counties in England, and only 1.2% of it carries any kind of protected status. If you wanted to build a nature reserve from scratch here, you'd have to buy a few hundred acres of that farmland and then do nothing to it for 3 decades. It doesn't pencil out, and no funding body waits 30 years for results. Then one farmer did exactly that without meaning to. In 1988, a Bedfordshire farmer named Hugh White got into a dispute with the government over his corn. At the time, new EEC rules were paying farmers to set aside land, taking it out of production for a fixed number of years to cut overproduction. White's response, according to his son, was blunt. "If you don't want my corn, I'll put the whole lot into set-aside." He meant it. Overnight, cultivation stopped on all 377 acres, every field. He wasn't trying to restore anything, he was making a point about corn. Nobody consulted an ecologist or wrote a restoration strategy. Grass grew tall in the old wheat fields. Tall grass is exactly what voles need, small grass-dwelling rodents, and the more voles there were, the more there was for a hungry predator to eat. One of those predators was the barn owl, and within a couple of years they'd moved into Strawberry Hill's disused outbuildings, drawn in by all those voles. By the time a decade had passed, White's fields had fledged more than 200 barn owl chicks. A man who'd spent his working life optimizing for yield had by accident built a place that raised more owls than almost anywhere else in the county. It might not last, not the way it was funded. 5 years in, White's government set-aside payments ended. White could have started farming the fields again. Instead, he went on national television, on Country File, and made his case. A lifelong champion of conventional farming had found himself a new calling, wild barn owl farmer. It worked. New funding was found, and White kept the land wild for another 20 years. None of that was protection, though. It was just money. The land was still on paper a working farm, one sale away from going back under the plow the entire time. Nobody cut the hedgerows or sprayed anything in that time. The hawthorn and blackthorn that barn owls didn't care about started closing in, turning the old wheat fields into something closer to a jungle than a meadow. That density is exactly what nightingales and turtle doves need to nest in: thick, tangled scrub, the specific messy middle stage that almost no working farm in Britain is allowed to sit in for more than a season. Strawberry Hill stayed that way for 37 years. This entire site existed with zero legal protection for 37 years, purely because one farmer chose not to farm it. If that's as unsettling to you as it is to us, tell us in the comments whether land like this should get automatic protection the moment nature reclaims it, or whether it should always come down to a public fundraiser. If you walk the footpath towards Strawberry Hill, you know you've arrived before you've seen a single thing. Nightingale song stacked on nightingale song, so close together in places that it's hard to separate one bird's voice from the next. That density is holding up half a county. Roughly half of every nightingale left in Bedfordshire sings from inside this one patch of land. Nightingales aren't the only thing filling this place with sound. Bats echolocate above the range human ears can pick up on their own. If you switch on a detector after dusk and translate those calls down, the same density shows up. 11 of the UK's resident bat species have been recorded moving through this scrub at night, their calls overlapping the way the nightingales do by day. Turtle doves purr somewhere deeper in the hedge line, among the highest concentrations left anywhere in the country. Harvest mice work through the grass stems, low enough that you'd never spot one from the path. Badgers cross the tree lines after dark. Rare orchids come up every spring in clearings nobody planted and nobody weeded. 4 decades of nobody stepping in built more here than any plan ever could. Not everyone nearby is sold on leaving it that way. One neighboring farmer asked about it directly, said he thought the place needed managing, cut back, tidied up. His wife disagreed on the spot. "It's wonderful for turtle doves and nightingales," she said. And from their son's farm on the hill next door, the whole thing looks like a piece of African savanna. When Hugh White died, and his wife not long after, their children inherited that piece of land, still zoned and valued on paper as farmland, sitting on some of the most fertile soil in the county. A developer or a returning farmer could have made a case for it in a single afternoon. Word reached the Wildlife Trust for Beds, Cams, and Northants that the land might be about to change hands, and they moved fast, leasing it in 2022 just to buy themselves time to think. A grant from the BIFA award covered half the purchase the following year. That still left half of Strawberry Hill sitting exposed, so in 2024 the trust went public. A £1.5 million appeal to buy the rest before anyone else got the chance. The response caught everyone off guard. Nearly £500,000 came in from more than 3,800 individual donations, including proceeds from a lemonade stand 2 brothers set up just to help. The remainder came from various trusts and funds, plus a single donor the trust would only ever describe as substantial. By the time the appeal closed, the whole site belonged to the trust outright. What happens now? Here's the part that didn't make it onto the fundraising poster. Left completely alone from here, Strawberry Hill won't stay the way it is. Scrub keeps succeeding into woodland if nothing interrupts it. And a full closed canopy woodland is actually bad news for the nightingales and turtle doves that made this place famous in the first place. They need the dense, low scrub stage specifically, not the forest it's slowly becoming. So people showed up to do on purpose what one stubborn farmer did by accident. On weekends, volunteers who've never farmed a day in their lives roll up their sleeves and dig by hand into ground that hasn't felt a spade in decades. 6 new ponds have gone in that way so far. Reserves Officer Chantel Warrener and the rest of the Trust team are working out, patch by patch, where to cut back and where to let run wild, trying to hold Strawberry Hill in the exact tangled stage that took 37 years of doing nothing to reach. It's not just volunteers with shears and pond spades either. The UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology is now using the site for a wider study into carbon flux, and the Trust has something almost no new reserve starts with. The place that became famous for being left alone now grows because people keep choosing to show up for it, one weekend at a time. A farmer who quit growing corn in 1988 and 3,800 strangers who refused to let the land go back 37 years later. Between them, half of Bedfordshire's remaining nightingales found somewhere left to sing. The Trust's next goal is to use Strawberry Hill as a source. Nightingales and turtle doves that fledge here have nowhere obvious to expand into. Step past the tree line, and it's the same flat fields and low-cut hedgerows on every side, the exact landscape Strawberry Hill itself used to be before 1988. Part of the current plan is figuring out how to link this scrub to anything else nearby, wild enough to receive it. Nobody knows yet if the surrounding farmland will ever soften enough to make that possible. For now, the ponds are still being dug, the footpaths are still being planned, and somewhere in that hawthorn, a bird that shouldn't still exist in Bedfordshire is singing at 4:30 in the morning, same as it has for decades, waiting to see if anyone else joins it. Strawberry Hill only stayed wild because one man decided to stop farming it and left it at that. Now a whole team chooses to do on purpose what he did by accident. Does that change what left to nature even means to you? Say so in the comments. If you know someone who still thinks a real nature reserve has to be designed before it can matter, share this with them. And if you want to see more places like this, subscribe. There's more coming.